So, folks, it's been teased that some new minion types are on the way to Battlegrounds, and that could mean totems, which are the only current minion type in the game we haven't seen, or it could mean something totally new and different. And thankfully, I've had this video on the back burner for a while. Custom Battlegrounds cards you guys made that all invoke some kind of idea of a new minion type. Like behind me here, we have the Innkeeper from Jake123, which would be a staff type minion, which is a fantastic idea fitting into Battlegrounds. You got Bartender Bob there clearly working in the tavern, and you could have staff to support him, and they could be a part of Battlegrounds. So this is, for instance, a tier 5 minion in Battlegrounds. It's a 5/7, and it reads at the end of your turn, add a coin to your hand and repeat for each of your unspent gold. So the Innkeeper here would be all about economy manipulation, giving you a ton of potential extra resources or allowing you to bank up resources for future turns. You save some unspent gold just because you don't really have anything going on. Maybe you push tier 6, hyper roll on tier 6 instead of, just throwing away a few kind of rolls on tier 5 that perhaps don't matter as much. And clearly, he's giving you that net 1 gold on his base effect and then that upside of banking stuff for the future. And if you imagine there being a ton of support cards, because this would just be one of many, maybe having those coins in hand has its own thing, pays interest in some way, and it all starts to scale and snowball into something totally crazy. Maybe coins turn into stat buffs on board. Who knows what it would look like? This is just a very tiny slice of what staff minions could be, but I love the idea of utilizing perhaps the income from the bar, utilizing things like drinks, other manipulations of your minions as a part of a staff minion type. That would be a great fit for Battlegrounds and one I could definitely see the Hearthstone team taking. Or alternatively, here you could have something like this, a Spellcaster from Andrew Jackson. This is the Pyre Caller, a tier 4 2/7 Battlegrounds minion, and it reads, after this attacks, cast Flame Lance on a random enemy minion. So basically adding spells into Battlegrounds as effects of sorts. Now we've had the Dark Moon prizes in Battlegrounds now, and those are sort of like spells, but they're just kind of, every 4 turns, a one-time thing. Whereas this would be spells being put into play in every single fight and having minions that utilize those spells. So you could have some that have spells that are buff-based, and maybe they give you temporary or permanent buffs. This one's just straight up damage. It's dealing 8 damage to an enemy minion on attack, and that could be great helping you snipe certain targets because the Pyre Caller could be attacking into a taunt, while the Flame Lance is killing a juggler of some sort, for instance. And there's a lot of upside there with that. And of course, you can imagine a lot of spells attach a Flame Strike to a minion, and that's a pretty decent chunk of damage. Could easily clear some Divine Shields, and that would be a very powerful potential card. So I love the idea of having minions with relatively base, weak stats, or stats that don't necessarily scale very well, but they work off of spells instead, and a spellcaster type would be a great way to design that. And then this one's pretty cool. The Gluttonous Mass here from Magus of the Fork. It's a tier 3, 3/5 ooze minion type. And I love the idea that oozes are a minion type. We've seen a handful of oozes, of course, in Hearthstone's history. We got a lot to work from. You'd probably need some new ones to make this work, but this reads at the start of your turn, destroy the minion to the left of this minion and gain its stats. So basically, here the Gluttonous Mass just keeps getting bigger and bigger by taking sacrifices from your board. And in particular, that says destroy the minion. It doesn't say like remove the minion. So this could be a way to even activate death rattles. So if you had like a Sneed's Old Shredder to the left of Gluttonous Mass, it would destroy the Shredder and summon the death rattle. It actually activate the death rattle. So you could get things like coins, extra minions on board, so on and so forth, while still utilizing the stats here. And of course, there are some crazy balance implications, but you can design oozes around that. Basically, minions that have destructive natures. Maybe they destroy something in the tavern when they're played. So they destroy a minion in the shop, or maybe they destroy all minions in the shop when they're played. Who knows what it would do, but I like the idea of minions that are eating things, absorbing things, destroying things. I think that's a fantastic idea and a cool way to scale visually. Just these oozes that keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's a fun idea. So I have no idea if this is balanced as the tier 3 minion. It seems perhaps a little too good with some of this wording, but it doesn't matter. We're not trying to hit home runs here from a balance standpoint. We're just trying to capture some really cool ideas as far as what minion types might look like. So this is more about taking this as a base, as an inspiration, and then letting your mind wander, what would oozes be? So of course I want to see some thoughts in the comments on like what these minion types could do and what they could look like. That said, before we get into our next card here, I do want to thank our sponsor for this video. It's Keeps, and unlike our buddy Bolvar up there, Keeps can help you keep your hair. That's right, 2 out of 3 guys will experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35, and I can see the stats on YouTube, and a lot of you are approaching that range, so it might be time to start thinking about Keeps. You can get treated right from home. You don't have to go to a doctor's office. Just talk to a Keeps doctor online, and they'll send their medication right to your house. It doesn't get any more easy or convenient than that. So if you're noticing that you're losing your hair, might be time to do something about it. For a limited time, you can go to keeps.com/Regis or hit that link in the description or pinned comment and get 50% off your first order. All right, so speaking of beautiful hair here, we got a beautiful card with the Archangel Belial from Rhythms. This is a tier 5 angel minion type, a 2/12, and it reads, after a friendly non-angel is attacked, gain Divine Shield and attack immediately. So kind of the idea here, I feel like almost of a guardian angel, like, oh my gosh, one of my friends is being attacked, I'm going to intervene in some way and try to get an attack off extra. And clearly, you know, if this attacks multiple times with Divine Shield and you've buffed its attack a little bit, it's going to get 4 or 5 Divine Shields over the course of a fight maybe and take some fantastic trades. You could also see more direct sort of guardian angel interventions where if something's going to get attacked, maybe a minion steps in to eat that attack with a Divine Shield, etc. But the playoff of Divine Shield and attack triggers and saving allies, I think there's something really nice there that tells the story of angels as they're typically told, and could be really cool. Now, angels aren't really exactly a thing in Warcraft necessarily, so there might be some other way to capture this idea or tell this story. I guess there's some stuff with like the Kyrian and Shadowlands that are kind of angelic in nature, so maybe you could go that route and still kind of convey this idea. I think that'd be pretty cool. But I really like this idea of intervention and disruption, and you know, Divine Shields being tied into it fits really well. It again would be pretty hard to balance, but I still think there's something really, really nifty about this that would be a good fit in Battlegrounds. So moving on, this one might actually be my favorite. This is the Ogre minion type. How fantastic. I love the idea that ogres could be Battlegrounds. This comes from Red Stake, tier 6, Agron Stonebreak. He's a 110 ogre, and he reads, whenever a friendly ogre is attacked, its attacker has a 25% chance to attack a random enemy minion instead. So the idea here being if that evil Cave Hydra attacks your Agron Stonebreak, there is a 25% chance that Cave Hydra is instead going to turn around and attack its own board. Now, let's be clear. Battlegrounds already has so much attack RNG, and I personally, I think, can feel really, really bad sometimes when you've got those mini RNG events. You know, over the course of a month, it all averages out and it's fine. But in an individual game, when you don't play a ton like me, sometimes I get very frustrated by those RNG events, and this would make them perhaps even more tilting and frustrating. So I don't necessarily love this from a like gameplay feel mechanic standpoint. I think this could be a really, really feel bad moment over and over again. But I do like the idea of ogres in Battlegrounds, and maybe forcing them to attack enemy minions might not be the route, but just, you know, having them miss attacks is strategically pretty important in Battlegrounds, because if a minion is attacking into a taunt and instead you want to snipe something else instead, you want to snipe that Baron Rivendare, you could do that through ogres, and I think that'd be really cool. Like, ignore that taunt because you missed your attack and hit something more relevant instead. And you can imagine a lot of effects that play around that. So although I don't really love the card Red Stake landed on here, the idea of attack missing and that whole ogre game style that we've seen in real Hearthstone, I think could actually be really, really cool in Battlegrounds. So there's something here to build off of with ogres, and I could imagine a minion type dedicated to that and having different ways to support that game plan. So not exactly this card. I don't think I'd want to see this one in Battlegrounds, but other ones like it and supporting it and working in a more singular direction as opposed to disrupting your opponent's stuff, but instead disrupting your own attacks, I think that would be really, really cool. All right, next up here is Amnimnar the Cold Bringer from Baron Sinclair with the Undead minion type. He's tier 6, 410, and he reads, at the start of your turn, give +2/+2 to a random friendly undead. Repeat for each minion that died last combat. So here we have some death synergies being applied to permanent buffs once you're back in the tavern, which I think is awesome. Minions that scale off of deaths kind of exist in Battlegrounds right now, but it's typically in combat, things that are happening in combat, Baron Revenue doubling death rattles, etc., giving you some combat advantages. But an undead minion type could bring that back into the tavern and help you actually scale your stats off of it instead. So a Mimnar here would scale your undead up a ton for everything that's dying. So if you had a bunch of tokens that get killed, or if your opponent had tokens that get killed, because this does not say each friendly minion that died, then you're going to get some really, really big stat increases. And in fact, this might be too many. I'm not really worried again about balance a ton. Just ideas and inspiration here more. But I love this idea that undeads are scaling off of deaths. And that kind of shifts strategies a little bit, shifts lobbies potentially a little bit as well, if undead is one of the minion types. So all in all, I think this would be a really, really cool function to add into Battlegrounds. Next up here, we got the Stellar Attendant from Herald BFC. And it's a tier 1/1/1, and it's an ethereal style minion. And this is a lot like our Spellcaster from before, but I just wanted to include a little bit of a different take on it. This one is, instead of on an attack trigger, a start of combat trigger. This one's going to cast Shooting Star on a minion opposite of Stellar Assistant. So instead of perhaps of a more random or attack based one like we saw with our Spellcaster in the past, this could be more of a positional influence on how a Spellcaster could work. So this one you put in a key spot, maybe try to snipe off a Divine Shield or two of your opponents utilizing the Shooting Star, and suddenly that's a pretty cool minion. Also, this is great at battling those early token Murlocs or Beasts as well, of course, because it's going to wipe the board and stay alive. So a cool minion that has that kind of very specific early game counter, but also a very specific late game counter with Divine Shield. So you could maybe toss this in and hope to do some work. But I just really like the idea of the really refined positional aspect of this, which I think spells give you more interesting options for. So lining up that Shooting Star so it's exactly in the right spot, and the kind of negative impact that could have on your board, but just, how important is that going to be exactly? So instead of an unstable ghoul that just wipes every Divine Shield, maybe you have this instead to snipe your opponents and preserve your own. I think that'd be pretty cool. So very similar in a lot of ways to the Spellcaster, but just a slightly different spin on it that could perhaps be a little bit more skill reinforcing. So moving on here to the Gluttonous Ghoul, a Forsaken type minion. It's a tier 3/4/4 from Synth and Lasers, and it reads, whenever you sell a Forsaken, gain +2/+2 instead of gold. So we have here a bit of a shift in the tavern phase away from economy towards stats, almost opposite of what we saw with the staff type minion, where your minions are going to be scaling, but you're going to be doing so at perhaps a very detrimental economy standpoint. So it's more about just getting those raw stats into play as opposed to manipulating your gold in a really efficient way. And I like this idea of kind of like, instead of selling your minions, maybe you're sacrificing them or killing them instead, and absorbing their souls or essence or something to get much, much bigger, which is a cool idea. So Gluttonous Ghoul would be one type of minion there, so he's going to get a lot bigger every time you sell something, but you're going to, lose some gold along the way. But if you had a bunch of throwaway stuff, or if there were certain Forsaken minions that were made to encourage this sort of behavior, whereas maybe, like they say, when you sell this, give a random friendly minion +1/+1. Suddenly, the stats start churning pretty nicely, and it could give you some really nice early game advantages at the cost, perhaps, of scaling into really nice minions in late game, just because you have less gold to work with. So you're not going to hit as many triples, you're not going to be tearing up as much, but maybe you have those stats to just stay alive and overwhelm people in the early game to make it a really fast lobby, or hopefully scale up enough that you can still compete with late game builds. But eventually maybe the Divine Shield Poisonous or the Dragon builds start to overwhelm you because they have all those other utilities like Divine Shields. So I like shifting the direction a little bit here and imagining what that could look like in a game of Battlegrounds and would that work and would that make sense? I think it certainly could if you designed it well. So Forsaken Minions and Gluttonous Ghoul could be pretty nifty. And then next up here's the Muck Burbler from Rob K, a tier 4 Muckling. He's a 4/4, and he reads, whenever you target a Muckling with a battle cry, cast it again on its neighbors. So instead of Murlocs, we get Mucklings, and apparently they're really good at like duplicating effects or kind of swarming or mutating or transforming into one another. But this is a fun idea of minions that kind of scale off of each other, this group nature. So if you got the Burbler, that's hard to say, on board, your battle cries are basically getting, sometimes triple effect as normal. And that could be awesome. And you could have a lot of adjacent neighbor style support cards here in the Muck Burblers, or maybe just more straight up like you could have one card that says, if you have 7 Muck Burblers, they all gain +5/+5. Those sorts of things that really benefit or play off of the group nature of the tribe, which, we see a lot in other auto chess style games. Other auto battlers have these group buffs just straight up. If you get 4 of these, you get some awesome effect. Hearthstone doesn't have that so much. It's more like passive or secondary effects. It's good to have a bunch of Murlocs because of Cold Light Seer, but you don't necessarily have to have a specific number or hit a target. Maybe Muck Burblers could bring a little bit of that back into auto battlers, where you're really, really encouraged to have as many as possible, and they play off of each other super nicely, which is at least what I'm envisioning here for the Muckling. Who knows what Rob K had in mind, but I still think it'd be a really cool idea on this fully group integrated minion type for Battlegrounds. All right, folks, so that wraps it up here for the custom Battlegrounds cards with different minion types. I gotta say, these are pretty darn cool. Like, I could almost envision all of these being in Battlegrounds someday, and I love the idea of diversifying what we expect builds and minion types to be in Battlegrounds a little bit. I think there's some room for additional strategy and complexity and almost different win conditions of sorts, instead of just getting as big as possible or as getting as many divine shields as possible. Shifting things where there are different sort of tempos or play styles or game plans of Battlegrounds, even more so than now. So economy based builds, just completely raw stat based builds, crazy board manipulations and minion thresholds and different things, right? I don't know. There's just so many different ways that you could imagine playing that. Now, of course, that would be an incredible balance challenge to make sure all that works, but it feels to me like there's still a lot of room to play around in Battlegrounds with those sorts of things. So that's what I'm excited to see, and I think, a lot of these minions inspire those sorts of ideas. I hope the Hearthstone team gets really creative in the future with what Battlegrounds looks like. That said, of course, I want to hear what you guys think about these cards as well. All right, so we're going to, of course, do another custom cards for Battlegrounds in the future. These take a while, but I still want to get some submissions. So for next time, what I want you to do is design for me a tier 6 Battlegrounds minion that you think would fit into basically almost any build. A sort of general use, neutral Battlegrounds card. I'm inspired for this by Illustra the Immortal. I thought that was an incredible card that just makes so much sense in so many different builds. And of course, we saw Illustra everywhere. And what would more cards like Illustra look like? Some card that serves a utility or has some sort of tech answer to other things, or is just, a powerhouse in its own right. So some tier 6 minion that almost any build could buy and would be happy with the result. So of course, check the description down there for a link to submit that card. You can also find a link to our sponsor for this video, Keeps. So be sure to check that out. But until then, thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.